Hello, inmates, and welcome to the Cellblock Scorch Week 4. This is Bones, and I'm recording as the winner of this week's Scorch. This week's prompt was given by Peishi, and it was Sunshine is a Bad Omen. So the cast of the Scorch I'm about to read are some of my oldest, most reoccurring characters. So there's a lot of lore going on that is not covered here, and we do not have the time to get into because I could talk about this thing for hours. But also, this one is set in an alternate universe than their actual one, and it's the first thing I ever wrote about them in the Scorch. So it should be alright, I think, if we just jump right in, and then I'll talk more about it afterwards. The name of this Scorch is Sunshine. The landscape was dark and desolate. Everything seemed to be in some tone of black or dark gray, and hardly any plant or wildlife could be seen from simply looking over the surface. The only objects interrupting the skyline of such a desolate zone were piles of rocks, some that reached almost 20 feet into the air. It was dark, save for one thing. One thing that gave away a mid-sized pile of rocks as different from the rest. They seemed to be glowing, though faintly, due to some sort of light source inside. This gave it away immediately as a hideout, rather than just another pile of useless rocks. Inside, 3 men rested. One seemed like he would have been more at home on the outside rather than the dimly lit bunker. His coloring would lend itself perfectly to it, and only the whites of his eyes would give him away. He was currently muttering to himself about paradigm shifts and stupid machines while fiddling with a peculiar-looking device embedded in the wall. The second sulked in the darkest corner of the room, having nothing to do at the moment, pressing the left side of his face into the wall. Despite the strange position, his right eye was open and darting around as if on alert. The third was a blonde, grinning from ear to ear and playing with the orbs of light that were bringing the dim glow into the room. "Be quiet, Zachem," the sulking man said to the blonde, turning his head to glare directly at him. This revealed the left side of his face, which had been pressed against the wall, but could now be clearly seen. A large, jagged scar stretched down over his eye, which was open, but the milky quality and the way it didn't glare directly at Zachem made it clear it was functionally useless. Zachem immediately silenced himself, but continued bouncing the orbs between his hands. After another moment to make sure the blonde was really going to stay quiet, and a glance towards the third man, who he had not dared to silence, but had seemed to pick up the cue anyway, he returned his ear to the wall. "I think I hear something." "Well, what is it, Romulus?" the third man asked, finally distracted from his machine. "Zachem, look outside. See if you can spot anything unusual," he continued without waiting for an answer. Romulus probably wouldn't be able to tell them exactly. Everything was just a guess. His ears were good, but they weren't perfect. "Oh, pretty!" Zachem gasped upon looking through the only small window in the area. "Maestro, it's getting all sunny!" "This isn't the right time of year for—" Maestro cut himself off mid-sentence, freezing for a moment before rushing to the window and shooing Zachem out of the way so he could peer out himself. Sure enough, several miles out, a few beams of what seemed to be sunlight shone down and illuminated the ground. Everywhere the light touched, the ground was enlivened from the dark gray into vibrant and beautiful colors, and the smoky air, when passed through by sunlight, revealed itself to be a royal purple which shone brightly in the darkness. Maestro paled, ignoring the stunning beauty of the scene in favor of being horrified at the sight of the sunlight. "Lock down! Now!" Maestro barked out, slamming a cover over the window and waving his hand at the light orbs, which disappeared, immediately plunging the room into darkness. He then rushed back to the machine, only mildly encumbered by the sudden darkness, while Romulus moved elsewhere in the room, making sure everything was secure, using his hands as guides. Zachem, on the other hand, wandered back to the window. Taking a moment to glance around, and seeing that his 2 companions were otherwise occupied, he had the best eyesight of the 3 and was practically unaffected by the sudden lack of light, he took the time to silently ease the cover off the window and peer out. It was way too pretty to ignore. Omens be damned. "Zachem!" Maestro hadn't looked over from his fiddling, but Zachem started guiltily anyway. "Put it back. We don't want them to find us." "Come on, Maestro. It's pretty," Zachem whined, fiddling with the cover, but not fully returning it to its place. "Pretty," the dark man snarled, whipping round, "doesn't mean it won't kill you. Sunshine is a sign of doom." "But," Zachem's head tilted, and his eyebrows scrunched in confusion. But his grin was much too large to be anything close to innocent. "Stravarius comes in a ray of sunshine, doesn't he?" Maestro froze momentarily, then whipped around so he was once again buried in the machine. "He would, wouldn't he?" he muttered, shoving as much disgust into those 4 words as he could possibly muster. It was true, after all. Stravarius did work for the government, and those bureaucratic sleazebags were the only ones with access to the light riders, a small form of transport that emitted light akin to sunshine as they flew. In the dark months, they were completely useless as stealth vehicles, but that didn't seem to bother some of the more audacious government mooks. Stravarius was one of them, but, as annoying as that ray of sunshine incarnate was, he wasn't the problem. The government as a whole was, of course. Maestro wasn't exactly on their good side, nor was Romulus, who Maestro had broken out of prison, or Zachem, whom the government saw as nothing more than a disturbing example of black magic. For them, sunshine in the dark months meant that they had been found. It meant that they would have to hunker down and stay silent for hours, or even days. Or they would have to evacuate. Or they would have to fight. None were appealing options. To be fair, though, these little raids were seldom more than vague annoyances. Sometimes they were nearly enjoyable. Not that Maestro would ever admit to not despising Stravarius. There was only one time it was truly a problem. When he came. The only one, other than Stravarius, who used the Light Riders in the dark months. The only one who would have the audacity to announce his presence and then begin a fight. An explosion rocked the room. They had not acted quickly enough to put him off their scent. He was attacking, and the glamour of rocks fell immediately. "Outside!" Romulus yelled, yanking Zachem out after him and knowing that Maestro would take care of himself. The dust settled, and only Zachem and Romulus stood outside the collapse. The Light Rider settled on the ground before them, still emitting terrible amounts of light. Romulus had to squint his one functional eye nearly shut to see anything, but Zachem stared directly into the brightness like it was nothing more than a small candle flame. "It's him!" Zachem hissed, ducking behind Romulus unashamedly. Romulus groaned in response, but wasn't able to respond verbally before a voice came from the ball of light. "Where is your master? Or was he too slow to escape his own death trap of a lair?" A figure walked forward enough to be a defined shape, but not enough to show his face. He was backlit into a dramatic black figure. Zachem was still hiding behind Romulus, and Romulus was determined not to justify the drama before him with a response. "I bet you would love that, wouldn't you?" Maestro's voice called out from behind the 2 minions. "You always were more drama than sense." Maestro had positioned himself atop the pile of rubble that had been his hideout, and was sitting in the most casual way he could manage. Romulus and Zachem shared a look, then rolled their eyes. The description could apply to more than one person in the vicinity. "Hate to interrupt, but do you think you could kill the lights interdit?" Romulus spoke up blandly, turning back to squint at the dark figure and completely ignoring both men's dramatic stances. "I don't grant the wishes of criminals," Interdit spat, striding forward until he could be seen much more clearly. He was around Maestro's age, with red hair and a sneering expression aimed at the 2 younger men. "Don't be so pretentious. You just can't see in the dark," Maestro mocked, rising deliberately to his feet on the unsteady ground, but not taking a step. "And you can see when it's this bright. This is a tactical choice, Interdit snapped back, having noticed how little Maestro was moving, and how he was looking past the light vehicle rather than at it. It's the wrong time of year for sunlight anyway, Maestro argued, taking a step forward. Unfortunately, as he was functionally blind at the moment, his foot found hold on a piece that was not as steady as one would hope for. He was sent tumbling to the ground. Interdit laughed. The minions merely cringed. Maestro scowled from his position on the ground, allowing himself a few moments to sulk about this ridiculous world he'd found himself in. A world in which the land was dark for months at a time, and a glimmering ray of sunshine heralded the appearance of doom in the form of the most obnoxious and high and mighty hero Maestro had ever had the displeasure to meet. And on top of that, slipping on a loose bit of debris. He had been to 6 alternate realities so far, and still, the comedy followed.
And now that we've heard that excellent Scorch, it's time to hear from the judge. It is I, Peishi. Thinking about Scorches like this from way back when, in 2018, is pretty nostalgic. I miss sometimes when there were only 2 people to judge between. It's a lot harder as the group has gotten bigger. But it's also been lots more awesome Scorches to read, so that's fun. Anyway, it was really easy for me to pick between the 2 during this particular Scorch week because Cricket and Bones are the only ones who wrote, right? They were the only ones in the Scorch. And Bones wrote something in Maestroverse, which I adore. So I was predisposed already to pick that piece. And then Cricket happened to write a fanfic for Welcome to Night Vale, which you can find on our Patreon. But I am not in that fandom. I have never interacted with Welcome to Night Vale content, so that kind of worked against Cricket. So it was really easy to pick, but I hope you all enjoyed the Maestroverse as much as I do, and give Bones a great round of applause.
All right. I hope you enjoyed my horrible attempt at a French accent and other horrible attempts to differentiate what everyone sounds like. Honestly, the hardest part of reading these things out loud so far has been trying to do voices, because I want them to sound different, and in my head I know what they sound like, but I am physically incapable of sounding like them, because I'm not them, shockingly. But I hope it was not terrible, at least. So anyway, I'm going to explain a little bit about what is actually happening in this universe with Maestro and his people. So in this one, Maestro is a sorcerer, Zachem is a golem, and Romulus is physically enhanced in some way, perhaps a werewolf, and Stravarius and Interdit are both government. So even though this is an alternate universe than normal, it's actually still within the canon of the story. This is all really complicated. I have a lot of lore, so I'm not going to explain it all. But basically, in the original universe, Maestro's a supervillain. Romulus and Zachem are his minions. Interdit and Stravarius are both heroes. Maestro's only power is that he's genre savvy, which is why the overall story is called The Wrong Genre. Because in the first chapter, it switches from being a drama into a comedy, and it just stays there, which is referenced in the final line of this piece. And as a villain, Maestro, really isn't having a great time in comedy, because he's the butt of, all the jokes. But without getting too far into it, there's an incident in which they start jumping through alternate universes because of a lot of different stuff. But generally in this lore, if you get into an alternate universe, what happens is you merge into your counterpart and essentially disappear. So Zachem, Romulus, and Interdit are all universe jumping as well, but they don't remember that, and the only way to get them back would be for someone else to drag them back, which separates the 2 versions, leaving the original in their own dimension and putting the hopper through the portal, basically. But anyway, Maestro is also universe jumping, which is super lucky for all of them, because his power happens to be one that allows him to retain that information. So basically what happens is when he merges, the other Maestro gains the knowledge that our Maestro has because of the genre savvy thing. So he gets information from his universe and from the universe that is currently happening. So that's why the whole time he's muttering about dimensions and he knows all the things from like the universe they're currently in anyway, but still wants to leave. You didn't get to meet my delightful man Stravarius in this one, so I won't go too far into him, but just so you know, his power also lets him remember, but it doesn't give him the knowledge about the universe they're currently in, so lots of shenanigans, because he has no clue what's going on in each new universe. Anyway, this is one of my favorite extended universes, and I really hope you enjoyed it. The tag for this universe on Patreon is Maestroverse, Maestro verse, and I've got a lot of Scorches linked to it. The ones coming out the soonest are week 10 and week 222A, both of which were winning Scorches, so you'll be able to hear them on the podcast. But there are also a couple that are losses that I'm really proud of, so if you're interested, then feel free to join the Patreon and check them out. And in the meantime, I would love any questions, comments, or feedback you have for me. The prompt I gave for week 6 was Lamentable Justice, which is the title of a short story I actually wrote for Maestroverse. Not one that's part of the Scorch, but, you know, I do write outside of the Scorch on occasion. Anyway, I gave this prompt because I wanted to see something tragic, and oh boy, did they deliver. So, see you guys in the next episode, and keep that fire burning. The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. We can be reached at thestellacore@gmail.com through comments on your podcast platform of choice, our Instagram, Stella_core, and at our YouTube, also called Stellacore. Feel free to check out our other productions on our YouTube channel, our cosplays on Instagram, or if you would like to support our creative endeavors, check out our Patreon or donate to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches.